I start talking here, you might be feeling like maybe I'm bringing in some matters that do not really address your concern. Okay, but what it simply says there, you can cite any text that is relevant to the poem or to the novel. In other words, make sure what you say is supported by other sources. Those sources could be the poem, could be the novel. So you are allowed to cite any text that is relevant to the novel or to what you're analyzing. Remember, citation means you can look for a source that is relevant, that is credible. So it could be either. So feel free to cite whatever text, whatever relevant source of information that you are citing. It's not an issue to cite even beyond the poem or beyond the novel that you are studying. So you can maybe cite somebody that made a comment. Maybe you were reading from a certain website, then you want to take that information from that website and use it in this instance. Yes, you are allowed to use any source of information. Obviously, that information must be quite relevant to what you are discussing. Right, Fatima, let me just come back to you, if I may probe a bit there. Where are you getting this from on the past papers? So you were looking at a past paper. You are preparing for obviously for the test or for the exam. So you have been looking at the past papers, and I noticed that you are worried about that. Is there anything else beyond the past papers that you have been looking at, which maybe is relevant to the module? Remember, our focus is on the module itself, how you are handling the module. Today, we are, of course, according to our plan, today we are going to be looking at literary analysis. You remember last week, I left a topic, and I said this week we are going to be looking at different techniques of analyzing a story or a prose. So our focus, let me just take you to the screen, hopefully you'll see it. Last week, somebody was sharing their poem, which was fine. So today we want to move now to what I would call literary analysis. Right, while I'm preparing this, may you look at remember I said you are going to be looking at short stories or even a novel itself, general techniques of analyzing a prose text. So may I ask you at this stage to just keep those handy. You might want to share, right, any extract that you prepared so that we can discuss that specific challenge that you have in this instance. So prepare something which you are going to present, like we had last time. Somebody was literally showing their own poem, and we were assisting them directly from what they needed. So I would appreciate if there is something that you want us to, obviously you prepared from last week, then you just share your screen, then we look at the text that you are analyzing, then we take it from there. But I'm going to present a list of literary analysis techniques. So for the first point or the first technique that we're going to look at, maybe you can take a piece of paper as I'm going through this. It's on my side here, but I'll print it out later. Start by writing out the narrative technique, or what you call the narrative style, right? So look at the narrative style, and then also look at the setting. Maybe writing this down, narrative style. Then you also look at setting. Then you also look at characters. right? Then you also look at language, what I would call a diction. Then you can also look at images or imagery. Okay. Now, so when we're looking at what we call setting, this is the background where the text is oriented, or where the text is based. So you can look at maybe this text is set in a city or in a rural area, or it's set in terms of geographical location and time frame. So you take note now that setting also influences character and obviously theme. So when you are done looking at the setting or the theme, you can now start looking at, for example, characters. What kind of characters are portrayed in that specific extract? If it's a novel or if it's a short story, obviously there are names. You'll have your major characters, you'll have your minor characters. But those characters, based on how they do, based on their actions, you can quickly interpret and say, this type of a character is shrewd, this type of a character is kind, this type of a character, all those adjectives that describe a character. So the story or the extract that you will wish to share, I want you to be looking at those, so that when you present, because I'm expecting you also to be presenting, you will be touching those aspects that I've indicated now. Setting. Then I'm coming to, I've mentioned character. Right. Let's look at style. Right. So style is the manner in which that language is used. How are specific words used to create a specific meaning? In other words, you can have certain words creating images. So you see now, style is part of imagery. So what is imagery? For example, you can be looking at symbols. You can be looking at personification, for example. These are figures of speech, right? So you look at all the associated meaning. It's quite a broad scale of things when you're analyzing this. So any aspect of language that's coming, you analyze, why has the writer began or preferred using this word instead of another? What is the intention? Remember, at the end of it all, you are always looking at the intention. Why is the writer writing that short story? What is the driving point behind? And what are the literary tools? Now, remember, now you are not only looking at meaning from just remembering the plot or just thinking about what the writer is telling you. You are now looking at how. The how part now starts coming in very handy. So how is this text communicating meaning? Take note that sometimes the interpretation could be different, right? Sometimes your interpretation of that same story is entirely different from another person's interpretation. So as we are looking at those short stories today, we're simply going to be using our background of our literary terms, right? So it's a list of literary terms that we can discuss. But anyway, just to cut that long story short, is there anyone amongst you that had, at last time we discussed the novel per se, we went into setting, we went into style and possibly themes. But today, I don't want us to look at broadly. It could be either a short story that you have read or that you want to share, or it could be a novel that you know. Then we quickly discuss how these features are used by novelists. because you are not going to be given a comprehension type of question to say, when did this happen? Why? How? No. Your questions will require you to analyze the broader issues mentioned in the story, or in the prose, if you may allow me to use the right word, in the entire prose. Right. Having said that, is there anyone with a specific story, a short story, for example, that they want to share, and then they allow us to start reading it together, coming up with ways of analysis, because it's analysis. And when we are doing an analysis, we are bringing our tools of analysis into action. So you'll notice that if it is a short story that you are analyzing, you might not have obviously met that short story before. If you have met it, you might be asked a different type of literary or prose features that you should be engaging on. So let's talk now with a specific reference, right? You may raise your hand if you have a short story that you prepared, or even that which you are asking about, whether it's a question from a certain extract, but that has got prose. Just put it through. Let's see if you can, from your side, share it easily, considering that my side here, things just don't look as rosy as I want when I'm sharing. Okay, you may raise your hand if you have a text, a literary text, because today we are focusing on prose. Right, it should be a discussive approach. Let's just discuss instead of listening to me. Let's open up and come up with different questions or different insights into a specific text. You may raise your hand and say to me, okay, I have this, because you are bringing your preparation, your texts, present them, and then allow me to comment. I'm waiting for responses. Ladies and gentlemen. If you have got that text or that short story that we said we are preparing from last week, you may want to, this is your opportunity now to start talking about it. Then I want to listen to you, and I want to comment on your analysis, on what you found. Right, let's start now with the literary techniques. You may want to write down literary techniques. Can you start with irony? Irony. Does somebody want to define irony and apply it into a text that they have been reading? Irony. Right. When you talk about irony, we talk about the opposite of what is expected. The opposite of what is expected. Now, what do we mean here? It could be a character in a story or in a novel who is portrayed in a way that opposes what you would expect. Let's say maybe it's a character that is staying in a very wealthy suburb or in a very wealthy area, but that character is very poor, is extremely poor. So what do you mean? What you'll be saying there is that there is something that is very ironic about the circumstances of that particular character. It could be their lifestyle. They could be living a life of poverty when they are coming from a very, very wealthy background. So there are many examples of irony that we could mention, as long as you would remember that when we are talking about irony, we are talking about a the opposite, or what would look as sort of contradicting the status quo. That is irony. So you may want to write down that word, go on and look at specific instances in your short story where things are ironic and why the writer wants to use irony in order to share. But normally, irony is also associated with humor. Humor. Right? Somebody wants to define the word humor. Right? Remember now, a text could use certain words that lighten the mood. So the mood of the text, instead of being tense, you know, the opposite. So you can have a sort of a humorous mood, the one that is light-hearted. So you talk about a light-hearted mood. What is a light-hearted mood? You know, so there's moments of laughter in the extract. There's things that make you laugh as a reader. But sometimes those issues that make you laugh as a reader are not necessarily there just to make you laugh. They are there to portray a certain image in a very funny way, in an extremely funny way. You may want to look at also satire. Satire, right? Satire is S-A-T-I-R-E. This one I'll leave it to you now to look for and define. I'll wait for a minute. What is satire? These are words that you meet in your analysis of literary texts. And you might not, of course, be using it directly, but it's important that we know what satire is so that we can go to the text and say, here, the writer is using satire. S-A-T-I-R-E. Can we define it? May I please hear voices for now? I think I've been alone for a long time. Can I just hear a voice? That word. You can even take a online dictionary and look for it. You may raise your hand. Yes, Desiree? Desiree, I'm listening.
Hello.
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay, it's the use of humor, irony, or exaggeration to ridicule or expose supposed stupidity.
Okay, very, very correct. Do you have an instance from a particular story or a novel that you read where there is that use, where there is use of that satire?
No,
Besides
sir.
Pardon?
No.
May you please note it down? when you read, as you read in your future endeavors, you look at instances now where that satire is applied. You have defined it absolutely correct, and I appreciate that response. Okay. Now, can I get, maybe whilst you are still there, you may want to now look at symbolism. Symbolism. Okay. What symbolism is SYMBOLISM. Symbolism. Right. Let's comment or let's define what that symbolism is all about. I know you're still here, Desiree. You can take it through and then try, while you start defining this word, let's go to our background of reading and say, when I read this story, there is this description, then these were symbols to represent this and that. It could be a poem. It could be a novel. Remember, we are not going to be putting barriers to these genres. We look at them as one literature. No, one genre of literature, but it's divided into poetry and into prose. So let's just be free to switch. If you have read a poem, for example, that uses symbolism, you will mention that there is symbols here, and they sort of mean this and that to advance a specific theme. But anyway, let's start by defining that symbol. Do you have an answer to that?
Yes, it's the use of symbols to represent ideas or qualities.
Okay, for example, let's give examples of symbols that could be used
from
in a text. Yeah, any text or any poem that you have read. I don't want to be prescriptive. Any. We just comment. Now that we have looked at this symbolism, we now want to say, for example, this poem uses symbolism when it brings in this and that. Okay, so try now to apply that definition to a poem or to a novel that you have read, or any literature that you have been exposed to.
Okay, can I please have a more?
Thank you. You will come back there. Anybody else, ladies and gentlemen? Let's just discuss. I'm happy that now our dialogue has started. That's how we should be moving now. We are on track. Thank you for that. Anyone that wants to explore that concept of symbols? Okay, the next one. Yes, I know you are still looking for that. So I was saying symbolism, but you will see now you cannot separate this symbolism from many other figures of speech, because sometimes these figures of speech could be also carrying symbolism or symbols, right? If somebody decides to use metaphors, for example, those metaphors can still be interpreted as symbols. But before we go that far, we're going to write that one, a metaphor. Okay, you meet that in the literary technique, metaphor, METAPHOR. Okay, so now you now have what you call your figures of speech. Right, your metaphor, your personification, and I'll just give these three main ones, and your similes. Okay. Anyone that wants to explore those three and try to relate them to your reading. Right, I'm waiting for hands. I'm waiting for dialogue. This is very basic, very, very basic. Can we just get to discuss all I want us to do is to just get into a mode of sort of discussing, right? What are metaphors in your reading? Because you may meet a metaphor. Irony is if you say one thing, but you mean something else. Yes, you say this, but you mean the other part. That I appreciate. You could have given examples. A metaphor is a figure of speech to create an image for the reader. I think let's try to develop that one into a more refined definition. What kind of image? Pretorius, I hear that, but what kind of image are we creating? So remember now, you start with the definition. Can I start off by saying your definition must mention a comparison? A comparison. So talk about comparisons. Now, all these three, metaphor, personification, similes, are all comparisons. Right? Let's talk about the first one, the metaphor. What kind of a comparison? You know what, when you define the word, you're going to quickly go into the text. I don't want to bring a text today and say this is the text. I want us to look at generally on what we are reading. Then you apply. It's a word, and then it's an application to say it's a metaphor definition. Then go to a specific a text or a poem or a novel, and you say you cite it. You put it in quotation marks. Then you explain how effective it is. So you evaluate it. Okay. So try to do that in your definition. But anyway, we are just defining them now because I think it's best to just look at all these literal terms, then come up with an understanding of each one of them, so that when we get to a text that we need to analyze, we are able to bring them into perspective. Remember, this is not about just saying what the story is about. I know most of us have read a lot of these novels or maybe short stories. Then all you do at the end is just to say, this short story is about 1, 2, 3, 4, a character who did this and that and ended up like that. No, that's at this stage, that is not what we are doing. At this stage, we are saying, how has the writer used literary features or literary devices to enhance the theme, to sort of help you to understand the theme? How is meaning enhanced in that context? So try to see more of how the writer means, how the writer expresses meaning through specific literary devices. Okay, so we are going to say a metaphor is a what? Anyone, please? Okay, I see you, Pretorius. I am following you here on your chat. But you know, it's always best when we talk verbally, so that it's faster. So there is the poems. They create an image that poems are nets of thought. It isn't meant to be taken literally. So you know what? You are bringing me to something else. Okay, I hear you that your mic doesn't work, Pretorius. It's interesting that your mic doesn't work, and I'm also apparently here not sharing my screen the way I want to, but I think it's technical issues there. Let's just live with that. But at least we hear each other. You know what makes me proud is that we are hearing each other despite these technical challenges. Okay. But I understand you when you say they create an image that poems are nets of thought. It is, yes. So let's go to that line and say nets of thought. That's where you get the metaphor from. So poems are nets of thought. So we know a net. So the word net there is used to describe what a poem is or what that image could be. So when you say a net, it's an object. So you could say a metaphor is a comparison that describes one thing using qualities of another, or it's an implied comparison. So you equate one thing to another. I think last week I quickly mentioned this. I said if somebody says you are a star, you know, they've equated you to a star, and then that's a metaphor. What associations does a star have? Okay, a star is bright, a star is shining, a star is beautiful from a distance, right? We know that a star is fire from our physics knowledge, but from our poetry, when you look at it from a distance, we associate it with beauty, images of beauty. But anyway, here, to come back to the definition, that metaphor is describing one thing using qualities of another. So go to the text possibly that you are reading. You might get something like maybe they would say Napoleon ruled his country with an iron hand. Right. I hope you hear that. Napoleon is a character. Now, what does he do? He's a ruler. He's a leader. He's a king of some sort. Then they say he ruled with an iron hand. So now when you go to that hand, it has been described as iron. Right, like you have indicated, it's not meant to be taken literally. So now you say in your answer, there is a metaphor that has been used. The metaphor is iron hand. Now you start explaining the comparison. Don't forget to explain the comparison. Don't just say iron hand, then you leave it there. Say it's got the metaphor is iron hand, right? The hand of a human being has been equated to that of iron, or has been given qualities of iron. Iron is rigid, iron is stiff, and iron is unpleasant when you're looking at. You know, you must remember that iron, when you look at iron, before it is changed into steel, you know, iron doesn't look that attractive. It doesn't have that lustre, you know, until maybe they blend it with other metals. So iron is sort of rough. So what you would see now is that qualities of roughness, qualities of strength, undue strength, qualities of rigidity are used to describe that character. Now you have mentioned the comparison, and now how effective is that comparison? That's when now you start saying the poet or the writer wants the audience or the readers to get a deeper understanding of the character or of the physical nature of Napoleon's ruling. It was based on dictatorship, right? That dictatorship had very, very strong consequences to those that opposed his rule. He would crush all his opponents. Iron would crush things. If you hit something with iron, you literally crush it. Right? Can you see now that I've put a figure of speech, and I'm giving an example, and I'm able to say, what is the definition first? What is the example from the text or from the poem? I cite it, I put it in quotation marks. And then finally, how effective is it? Okay, right. Let's look at the next one, personification. Right, I'm sure you are reading in your background. So what is this personification all about? Let's just define it first. Then we'll go into the intricacies of what personification is all about. But you may want to remember, if you have got a dictionary, I still allow you to quickly consult it. Then come up with a definition. But remember, we are not only going to be asking you to define, we are going to be asking you to provide an example and explain the effectiveness. Okay? What do you do when you personify? What's a person? So when you personify, what are you doing? So when you personify, you're going to have a writer or a poet giving living qualities to non-living objects. In other words, you get a description of a mountain, for example, as something that is alive. A mountain could be described as a giant. The giant mountains of our land. So once you say the giant mountains of our land, you're now describing the mountains using the qualities of a giant. Obviously, when you talk about a giant, you talk about an animate object. So when personification has been used, human qualities or animal qualities are attributed to non-living objects. May you then give me some examples of personification? Generally, let's not even go to any specific text. Let's just be general. What are examples of a personification? One or two? Right, I see there is a hand there. MP. I'm seeing the initial there. You may want to say something. I've given you the chance. An example of personification? I'm waiting. I defined any. From any poem that you have read. Think about any poem. And remember where a poet has used personification. It's giving living qualities to non-living objects. For example, the sun is smiling down on us. So you're looking at the action of smiling. Yes, that is an example. But there are many others that you can think about. So when you are reading a text, you should at least have an appreciation of what this specific personification is all about. Okay, I'm now leaving that personification. Now we are proceeding to a simile. Simile is S-I-M-I-L-E, a simile. A definition, right? What could be the difference between a personification and a simile? Let's look at that now in terms of intensity. Can I get one person just because these are not very different? Personification and simile, they share something in common. I'll give an example. I said, for example, Napoleon ruled with an iron hand. I said that is a metaphor. Right. If I said Napoleon's hand was like iron or was as strong as iron, what is the difference there? When I say Napoleon had an iron hand, and then I also say sorry, let me repeat. Napoleon's hand was like iron or was as strong as iron. Can somebody comment on the difference between the two? You're saying it's a similar. It's a type of figurative language which is used to compare one thing against another. For example, as strong as an ox, yes. But how does it differ from that of a metaphor? Because once you think a metaphor, you know, the lower levels of a metaphor, they become a simile. So instead of describing something directly, like I've said, you are a star, I would say you are like a star, right? I might say you are as fast as a bullet, then I'll just say you are a bullet. If I say you are a bullet, then it becomes a metaphor. If I say you are as fast as a bullet, then I've made it a simile. Okay, any examples from your, particularly poems? They use quite a lot of these figurative devices. Anyone that wants to give examples or apply these three into what they've been reading before? Just remember, any poem, come up with an idea. Tell us, this is using a simile. Why has the poet used a simile? I hear you, Pretorius. Personification and simile are both meant figuratively. A metaphor further enhances a statement that is being made. Actually, a metaphor is more intense than a simile. If somebody wants to give you an intense description about something, they would rather use metaphors, because metaphors really attribute specific qualities over something. They equate. You know, it's like you can tell somebody, look, you are this, right? You are a, like I've said, you are a star. No, nothing above, nothing less. You just there. You are a star. You are excellent. You are perfect. Doing it very well. You are an angel, right? You are a devil. So all that represents an equated description. Always remember, the idea is to state how that specific figure of speech enhances what the theme or the subject that is being discussed. Okay, so take note now that when we are looking at symbolism, you know, you are not going to look at symbolism as isolated from all these other issues that you have raised here. So, and it could be an object, it could be an idea. That object or idea that has been mentioned could represent something. It could create a specific symbol. Right? Now, these symbols will definitely have another level of meaning. Now, I want us to look at connotation and denotation. But once we talk symbols, we end up now talking our connotation and our denotation. So when you're analyzing a specific text now, after you have looked at all those, you still now go and look at what you call connotation and denotation. So when we say denotation, I'm going to say, right, if you can say denotation, D-E-N-O-T-A-T-I-O-N, denotation, and then you will say here, connotation. Right. So any difference between those two? Anyway, let's say your denotation, it's your surface meaning of the text. What is the surface meaning of the text? This is what the text seems to say when you are just reading it. Before you start applying these metaphors, these symbols, this is what the text is saying. So it's the literal meaning. Let's say denotation is the literal meaning. It's the literal meaning. So what do I mean by a literal meaning? You don't have to start making inferences. You just get the meaning directly as you have read it, right? So if I were to describe a situation where somebody came, maybe it was a Valentine's and they were giving somebody a present, right? Say, maybe I would say, John gave Mary a lovely rose, right? Let me just say that John gave Mary a lovely rose, right? R-O-S-E for a rose. That's so. That's sentence. When I'm looking at it denotatively, it's just telling me that John just gave Mary, a rose. A rose is just a plant. Maybe it's a plant that has got flowers, plant with flowers, beautiful flowers. That's the denotative meaning. That's the surface meaning of that line. See? So when now you look at the connotation would refer to a deeper meaning. What is a deeper meaning now? It now shifts from just John giving Mary. It now has to do with this rose. Now, this rose, obviously, it's a symbol. Now, meaning becomes symbolic when it comes to connotation. So I'm going to say meaning becomes symbolic. What do we mean when you say symbolic? You now start seeing a symbol there. For example, a rose starts assuming a symbol of affection. A rose begins to be a symbol of affection, a symbol of love. But at the same time, you may want to also keep on probing there to say, okay, so denotatively, John is the one that is giving Mary that lovely a rose. Now, connotatively, now you can still start seeing symbols there to say, okay, now based on that, you tend to observe gender. You see that sentence now starts bringing in gender associations. Okay, what are these gender associations? Possibly there is one gender that performs certain privileges or responsibilities of another. See, all I'm saying is you must see things beyond the lines. Just go deeper beyond what you ordinarily see, beyond the ordinary words. I see that Desiree, you are saying apologies, say I can't seem to access the portal to find the e-reserves. Okay, we will look into that, Desiree, but I remember you had to define some word there. You will still look at it. When you find it, you will come back to us. We appreciate your effort. Thank you very much. But I hope you are still following our discussion. Okay, so having described now what we call connotation and denotation as part of what you'll be looking at in terms of symbols. Remember these symbols, they have, like I've given an example. If I mean, let's just have a look. If a dove, if you looked at a dove or you looked at a snake, those are just animals. But we tend to give certain meanings to those animals, right? Whilst a dove is just a bird that, that flies, usually grayish in color. You will have a dove as a symbol of love or peace. So, but that is also culture specific. In some cultures, the dove represents peace, but it's not always, that is universal. in certain instances, the dove might not necessarily represent peace. An owl, for example, I'm sure you guys know an owl. An owl is that a nocturnal bird. What does an owl feed on? It feeds on rats or any other nocturnal creatures. So when you see an owl in your yard, you might want to start giving it. You are no longer going to see it just as an animal. You will start seeing it as a symbol of witchcraft. But now take note now that there are some people who keep these owls as pets. That's why maybe some people end up getting the label of being witches or wizards. Especially in Africa, if you find yourself keeping owls, you'll be given that connotative meaning, that associative meaning, which is not universal. Okay, I'm sure now you understand what I meant when I said connotation and denotation. So when you have read that particular text, what is the connotative meaning here? What is the denotative meaning here? Remember, it's not just about reading the storyline to say, okay, let's just look at some of the fables that we listened to when we were children. You'd notice that animals, for example, are used as characters. Maybe you are wondering why animals are used as characters in most fiction, especially in the fiction called fables. These animals are used as characters. Why? Because the writers did not want to use specific names of people. Obviously, names of people would come from specific cultures. So these animals would have certain qualities that represent human beings. But now from that fable, there would be a moral story behind. What is it that the fable is teaching? Maybe it is teaching that, you know, this particular animal that was so deceptive, that was deceiving other animals, maybe finally ended up dying in a very painful way. Okay, so you'd notice now that that story that you are reading is not just the storyline. There is a greater subject or a greater theme, maybe a theme of dishonesty, right? The writer here is, when you have read everything, he's sending a message, or is intending to teach his audience about the consequences of being deceptive. So once you get that theme from what you have read, you get that theme, then now you go on now and you say, in this story, the writer has used this setting. Obviously, it's within a context where things were happening, right? Maybe looking at the time, look at the description of events and objects and surroundings. Give that a meaning, relate it closely to the text. Remember, you are the one acting on these things. It's not like it's written somewhere. You're the one coming up with the meaning and coming up with how the writer has come up with a storyline. Why does he use specific characters? Why does he use this type of, maybe if it's a fable, why do fables use animals? Okay, then you look at the type of the relationships as well. Also take note that when you are looking at characters, you also look at the relationships between characters. Sometimes you might also be looking at specific tension between characters. But anyway, whilst I'm on tension, I'm shifting to another concept, which I will call tone. Tone, T-O-N-E. Right. Remember, as long as you're analyzing a text, you are going to talk about tone, So tone has got to do with the mood. So the mood is created by the tone, but at the same time, that tone is created by what we call diction. It's created by what we call diction. Right, let's try to look at these. You may have a text that you're reading, and then you realize that in this poem, the writer, in this poem, the poet, or in this story, the writer, right, is using certain words that create a specific mood. Let's say maybe the poem or the prose or the paragraph, or it's a short story, if it is about a sad event, right? Say maybe it's about death, if you may allow me there, right? So the poet is writing about maybe the death of somebody. So there will be words there that are associated with the pain of death. So I would have the words like sorrowful. I'll have the words, any other adjectives or synonyms that are associated with this pain of death. They make what we call diction. So these specific words now, they start creating a mood. They start clustering together to form a mood. Right? That mood now is what we call tone. So the tone has to do with the atmosphere. I think the other word that you should also remember there is atmosphere. So you can say tone, mood, atmosphere. So these we're going to treat as synonymous. Because for the atmosphere, I know most of us might know atmosphere for the different layers of air in the air up in space. This is not what you're talking about when you're in language. The atmosphere is a mood that is created in a specific text. When you are reading that text, how do you feel? How does it arouse certain emotions in you? So some atmospheres are pleasant, some atmospheres are not that pleasant. But now, certain words that describe the tone, sometimes you could say that tone is friendly, right? Certain words, if you may be writing it down somewhere, the tone of a text or a story that you have read, if the characters there are not fighting, there is no tense relationships, everything is fine. So you would mention that it's cordial. Cordial. When I'm saying cordial, it's relaxed, it's quite friendly. But sometimes the tone could be sarcastic. What do I mean by sarcastic? It could, while you're reading it, remember now, when you are reading, you just don't take things literally. You try now to say, but now this has been said this way, but it carries some remnants of sarcasm here. Somebody could describe a certain situation, and then in that description of a certain situation may put specific characters. But those characters, they are sort of demeaned or devalued in a subtle way, in an indirect way, Then you're like, but from what is happening here, there is sarcasm here, the tone of the text. And remember, this sarcasm also is not too different from irony. While we agree that irony has to do with the opposite of what we are expecting, we will understand also that that irony could be another form of sarcasm. This sarcasm tends to use indirect language. It's not normally direct, it's indirect. Okay, so sometimes it could be humorous. You know, you have read this, there is so much laughter, there is so much humor, it's all pleasant. But sometimes the tone of the text could be angry, you know. Try now to look at those specific words that create that tone. And like I've said, that tone is the manner in which the author expresses himself, or the manner in which that text creates a specific mood. This is how it feels, like I've said, when you have read. And that feeling comes from the use of specific language devices. Right, can I pause for questions while I'm still here? We are looking at literary analysis. It could be a short story that you are reading. It could be a poem that you are reading. It could be a novel that you are reading. You are not only going to tell the storyline to say in this, there is a person who does 1, 2, 3, 4, or this is how it started and this is how it ended. No, there is a certain analysis that you use using these specific literary or poetic features that we are describing here. So you look at words and you start classifying them as, it could be words, it could be phrases, it could be sentences. Try to classify them and put them as different categories. These are figures of speech. These have to do with symbols. This has to do with meaning at this level, at a deeper level, at a surface level. Like, can I then pause now and just entertain 2 or so questions before I give a few more words? So in our next analysis now, we are going to be bringing in these words to the text that we are reading. So each one of us is going to get a different response to a text based on what you were reading. So from what I wanted us to do today, it could have been very, very easier if you had an open mind about what you were reading and expressed how the language is used there in that specific short story or in that specific paragraph. Remember, prose could be a paragraph. And that paragraph could be maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs that are describing an event. You could have obviously read a particular extract to make it more oral. We don't want to keep on reading. We can discuss these things orally. Then you go back to your text now and you start understanding them with specific examples. So open up now, comment on what we are doing so far, where the gaps are, so that I can also know that I'm addressing your specific need. Right, so let's also look at the other important concept when we are analyzing that text. So let's look at a theme. I think I started off by talking about a theme. Now, a theme is the main idea in that particular text. So when you have read that short story, like I've indicated, what is the theme? It's the subject, okay? Now, that theme conveys the message of the writer. Sometimes it might also contain the writer's beliefs. It's not always like the theme, you know, it's cast in stone. It cannot change. Depending on even when you are writing yourselves, you might at some point find yourselves putting in your beliefs about something. So a theme would be based on that specific writer, and you can only see it after reading the entire text. So the main themes are often introduced in the opening sentences, usually what you call the exposition. So the text will have the first few paragraphs, or especially even in the introduction, the first opening sentences of each paragraph. Those will always create or will give us the exposition of what those themes are. Like that, you can look at a subject and say, now this text is all about love, for example. This text is all about cruelty. This text is all about maybe the effects of the hurricane. For example, you are reading something about the effects of the hurricane in a particular setting, right? But sometimes note that these themes can also be conveyed figuratively, right? It's not like they're always literal. Sometimes you can pick it from a figure of speech, right? You may want to put your hands down. I see that your hands are up there, MP and MM. Thank you. May you just put your hands down for now. Unless, Mabi, Sakile, you have something to say? Mororisen?
No, I don't.
Okay, but are you following so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
May I please once again ask, while you are still here, you understand that when you are doing literary analysis, you're going to look at a text, and then you'll start looking at it in terms of themes, then you look at it in terms of style, in terms of tone, right? Then you will be obviously describing how all these aspects are developing the subject or the theme. I hope that is clear, so that you are not losing marks for just writing about the subject, because most students tend to just write about the subject. They don't write about the features or the devices. Remember, these devices describe how a particular text or a particular genre, whether it's a poem, whether it's a novel, communicates meaning, which sometimes is not always what? Direct, but it's indirect, which in most cases is not always denotative, but it's also connotative. So when you have read that, you ask yourself, what is the surface meaning of this story? What is the deeper meaning of this story? I think whilst I'm still at that, maybe let me just give a common example of stories that we all relate to from our backgrounds. I think you'd understand that religiously, you would have what they call parables, especially from the Bible. They just take a certain story, like you'd have Jesus talking in parables. He was creating. Remember, now he was a storyteller. Those are examples, but we are not using those from the Bible because we have got our own set texts. But I'm using these because they are more familiar to most of us. So what were those stories like? So you would have a parable. They call them parables. They would just narrate a story. But after narrating that story, they will say, what is the deeper meaning of this story? You take, for example, the parable of the sower, this person that went and was just sowing seeds and sowing seeds. And some of these seeds fell on soil that was rocky, others fell on soil that was rich and fertile, and some of those seeds fell on thorns, and as they grew, they were choked or they were destroyed by the thorns, and some fell on the ground and the birds ate them. You see, that's a story that Jesus is telling. But then later on, he goes on to say, this story now starts coming up to represent, for example, different kinds of people who when they are told about the word of God, would take it differently. Others would practice it and understand it. So those seeds that fell on fertile soil represent good people. So you can see now that there's representation in meaning. What does this represent? You see, so it's your text, and when you are given that text, you start analyzing it in terms of representation. What does everything represent in that specific text that you are reading, and how does it enhance the meaning of the writer? What was the writer's intention? But I think also let's remember what we call register. Now, when you're analyzing these literary texts, we will have what we call register. What is register? I know some of you are already thinking about today's register that you attended this tutorial. It's a register, but no, we're not talking about that kind of a register. In our literary analysis, what is register? So I'll say explain or define the term register. And provide specific examples from stories or novels that you read. Or from text. Let me just say from text. I take note now that when you talk about register, you are talking about the appropriateness of style. So when I'm saying the appropriateness of style, remember now that most of these texts have got audience, right? A certain text could be meant for a specific audience. It could be children, it could be adults, and maybe some text could be for teenagers, others could be for scholars like you, people at university. So there's a register that is used. If you are looking at a scientific text, maybe you're looking at a text that is describing a scientific experiment, it's different from a text that is giving someone directions. So you'd realize that the text that is describing a scientific experiment carries what you'll call jargon or words that are associated with a specific discipline. But I would have wanted to just finish this so that I assign you specific text, so that when you are analyzing this, before you write your exam, you are able to have a host of literary features, a pool of literary ideas, so that you are able to identify them. But anyway, if maybe it's late, you can tell me, but I wanted 20 minutes. Heads up those that are giving me a green light to continue for the next 20 minutes. Could you raise your hands if you want me? I want to see hands if I'm to continue. I see Desiree. You have given me the green light. Yes, please. Thank you, Desiree. Ponzo, I hear you. Pretorius, I get you. Yes, so I can continue. Awesome, awesome. Right, let's get it moving now. Yeah, thank you. I think as long as you give me that It's fine. Right. So we are on register. So when you have been reading now, you'll ask yourself, what kind of language is used in this specific text? And we said we called it register, but sometimes that register is not very different from diction. No, when you say diction, you're talking about choice of specific words. But you'll notice now that if you were to write a text for teenagers, you would use a different type of language, maybe from a text that you are writing and is meant for academics like you. So you'd notice that a text written for teenagers would have informal language. Sometimes it might have colloquial expressions. Sometimes it might have slang. I know maybe as I'm talking now, most of you are acknowledging my register, but this gentleman talking is an academic. He's using formal language. Why am I using this formal language? It's because I'm on a formal platform and I'm addressing academics. So that is register. You notice that when you address me, keep on saying sir, and then I also keep on saying ladies and gentlemen. I'm polite. I'm using polite expressions. All that is part of register. So take note now, and that register is part of style that you use. So don't look at these words and see them as totally separate from each other. See them as interconnected. See them as building up consistent development of a theme or a subject that is being discussed. But of course, that is meant for an audience. There are people that are listening, or there are people that are reading specific words that the poet or the writer has referred to. Now, that register, it also depends on the type of the writing or its purpose, right? So you would notice now that we read certain poems that in our previous discussion, we said they were using enjambment, the run-on lines, right? Some of them possibly had words, that did not have what you would call a rhyme or rhythm, right? So you'd notice now that the choice of these words, sometimes there could be certain words that are very, very direct with a negative charge on them, negative connotations on them. So you'd notice that most of these apartheid poets were writing, and sometimes the register could possibly indicate the tone of the poet, right? That the poet is angry, the poet is discouraged, or the poet is hopeless. So specific words now would give out that type of an indication. So you see, I'm basically building up a foundation so that when you read this now, you are able to say all these words carry a certain significance. It's not just reading through that makes a difference, but it's interpreting what makes a difference. Now let's quickly go to the this plot or the narrative, because our focus today is on a story or on a short story or on a novel. Now I've indicated that you will have a storyline, but that storyline, it could be linear, right? So what is a linear storyline? What is a linear? That word linear, I'm just going to write it there on the, what is a linear storyline? Or what is a linear plot? Does somebody want to explain what a linear plot is? Right, the word plot, once again, it's a word that you're going to be using when you are describing the sequence of events. But sometimes the plot could be linear. In other words, if it is linear, it is chronological. This is where it started. Maybe the character was a young person. Urorise, I hear you. You want to say something?
Yes, sir. Answer the question.
Or you put it. Okay, I'm checking it now. Look, what was the answer there? Can you read it for me? I haven't seen it from my side.
A line is a storyline that has a middle and it.
Okay, so it's the one that will have an introduction. Thank you, well expressed. It will have the exposition, you know. Basically, then it will have the rising tension, complication, the climax, the end. Sure, you remember now. Just go and look at that, where that will start with the narrative features. Narrative features that start with the exposition, moving up to climax, to anticlimax, and then to resolution. So if you remember those features, you are analyzing what is called a linear plot. But sometimes that plot might use what is called flashbacks, right? Flashbacks. Now, take note now, if it's a story that you are reading, take note now of saying here, the writer is now using what is called flashbacks. What is a flashback? So in a flashback, instead of continuing with the narrative, telling the story in a linear way, the writer might go back into previous events. So he now wants to move back into time, like things that happened way before. Right? Yes, he's saying, Moro is saying it's the recall of the last. I like that description. Yes, but in a nutshell, instead of moving in a linear fashion, the writer might want to take us back into events that happened far before what he is describing at that point in time. So we call that a flashback. But at the same time, there's what is called a flash forward. What is a flash forward now? The writer might want to give us an indication of the events that had happened, that would happen way after. So it's like, you know, other people would call it a fractured narrative. Yes, Pretorius, yes, imagines the future. I'm happy with that. But now remember, he's using characters here. So he can be using a specific character to say, this is what happened, or sort of giving an indication of what the character does in the future. If you have read quite a lot of novels, you know, there is different genres of novels. And there are some novels that do not follow this linear structure. If you can find time, there is a novel. This one, you may want to read it for your own enjoyment. Look for a novel that says, I'm just going to type it here. This is reading for leisure, né? It's for your leisure. Reading for leisure, right? I know this is not a prescribed novel, but can you read a novel? I think it's welcome to Hillbrow. if you find time, just look. I'll tell you the author now of that novel. Right. If you read this one, this you'd notice that the writer here would just fracture the narrative, would give events about something that happens in a distant future, elsewhere, even maybe in another imaginary a place, maybe called heaven, I don't know, somewhere else where it's not even on earth. The characters is like they've passed on, they're elsewhere, then comes back and he connects them to the characters that are still alive. Then now goes on to narrate an event that happened way before. It's like everything, you know, is sort of narrated in a manner that mixes. It's like a combination of different narrative styles. So that we call that flash forward, flashback style. So we also know that a plot can also have subplots, right? So take note now that while you are reading, think about the main plot and the subplot. So the main plot is now, you notice that there is a storyline that is given. This is the main storyline. But while that storyline is given, there is small pockets of sub-stories that are also given there. Those sub-stories are happening within the context of a main story that is being told, and we call that subplots. So those are literary terms that you are using when you are analyzing a text. What is the main plot here? What is the subplot here? Okay. What is the climax of the story? What is the climax? You may want to write down there, okay, when you are analyzing. You may say, explain or discuss the climax of the short story that you read, or the novel, right? Discuss the climax. This is the highest point of the story. But now, you will see now that you also have the unfolding of the plot, that which you call the denouement. That now the events are coming up, unfolding. As they unfold, they get to the climax. From the climax, they roll down again to the end, what you'd call the anticlimax. Right, there is also suspense. I hope you are writing all these words down. Suspense, right? Suspense is a literary technique. So how does the writer use suspense? In the story? Or novel? But can I get a definition of suspense? Isn't you analyzing a story? You are not going to leave the concept of suspense. Okay, so when you're thinking about suspense, think about how the writer sustains the interest of the audience by withholding the climax or the events that lead to the climax, so by delaying the events that lead to the climax, right? That's a technique. So the writer might keep on giving these subplots, right? So look at suspense as a literary technique, and you also explain how effective that suspense is in that context. Okay, so in a nutshell, now I'm summarizing what the focus was Okay. Our focus today was on analysis of literary texts. We started off by, of course, delayed as we were due to technicalities. You raised questions about literary analysis and citations. I think I got a few questions there about how citations are done when you're writing. I mentioned that you need to get sources, various sources. When you're writing about a short story or when you're answering questions based on a novel, you are going to cite from the novel itself, right? You write the title of the novel, right? Obviously, when you are starting, you will indicate that in the novel, then you write the novel and you may want to put it, see the title of the novel must be written in italics. When I'm saying italics, it cannot follow the same font as the other words, or you can put it in quotation marks. The title of the novel, then you put the title of the novel, right? Or in the novel, then you put that. The writer portrays the theme of, then you write the theme. Then now, he uses specific stylistic features to enhance that theme, right? So when you start now, maybe you're starting with the first stylistic feature, then you are saying the writer is using symbolism, right? You go on now, you define symbolism is 1, 2, 3, 4. You go to the novel, right? On page this and that. Or you can even write the name of the novelist. So you start off by writing the name, then you just write the year of that or the novel was written, and then the page, right? Then you indicate what that symbolism is, right? It says or uses the words, then you put them, you can paraphrase them, put them in quotation marks. Then you go on to explain. You're going to explain what you are describing there. So citation can be in-text citation. I'm describing in-text citation. So in-text citation, try to use the novel that you are using, but at the same time, you could read other sources that have commented on the same novel. If you read a journal that commented on the novel or that commented on the poetic features or on the literary features used by that specific novel, you cite as well within that paragraph, you cite. So you're allowed to do what you call cross-referencing. You take references from various sources, but those references must be developing the very idea that you want to develop as well. Don't just pick anything that is unrelated. Then you develop your argument, you conclude it's an essay in this case, right? You're writing an essay basically. So you follow your academic writing skills of paragraphing, of punctuating. When you are citing, you put quotation marks. If you are not citing directly, you paraphrase, write it in your own words. Please avoid a lot of citations. It's you that is stating clearly what the writer intends to do, how they have done it, how effectively. So then lastly, you go to a conclusion where you summarize. In summary, or in a nutshell, the poem or the short story or the novel discusses 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, you are summarizing what you did in the main discussion. Then when you are done with everything, you go to this last section, which you call references. So in the references section, that's where you're going to start writing the names of the authors that you read. But we are using what you call the Harvard referencing system. But anyway, you're done with most of the assignments. But just look at the Harvard referencing system. We will be looking at that. So that was how, in as far as you are concerned about how to do the citations and presentation of your work, I hope I've addressed that. you are saying something yourself in response to that specific text. Then you are bringing in sources to support you. Then you are citing those sources. But as you cite those sources, describe them, discuss them. You know, don't just cite and say so and so says, so and so says, so and so says. But what do you say yourself? Because it's you who is advancing an analysis or an argument. So anyway, so the literary features that we looked at, they are quite a number today. I'm not going to mention all of them, but we spoke about symbolism. We spoke about figures of speech. We defined similes, personifications, metaphors. We looked at symbolism. We looked at connotation and denotation. We looked at irony. We looked at satire. We looked at humor. We looked at, obviously, some of sarcasm there could be a feature that you see. We looked at themes. Said, of course, there's always themes in that text. Always know the theme, always know the style. The style now is the manner in which that language is used, right? Always know the tone. How does it feel to read that text? We say the tone is the atmosphere. So the word tone, the word atmosphere, the word mood are all clustered there to mean one and the same concept. The mood, you know, it's the feeling. That feeling creates the atmosphere. That atmosphere is the one that gives you the tone. That tone has to be described using specific adjectives. Like you can say the tone of the text is gloomy. The tone of the text is jovial. It's you might want to say the tone of the text. It's melancholic. Whatever negative words, if ever it's a negative, whatever positive adjectives follow that. So describe the tone after you have read. That tone comes from specific words, which you call diction. So certain words and their associations, they give us the tone. I said if you are a subject of death, then words that are associated with the loss of life, pain, suffering, and even loss of hope, all those words are giving us the tone of that. Then we spoke about the register. See, so when you talk about register, look at that and say, how does this writer use specific words? Obviously, there's audience who is going to read this text, and then who is going to benefit. So why does he use certain words? Slang for which group of people, jargon for which group of people, and why? Obviously, there's always an intention. This is why the writer is writing. Is it to entertain? Is it to educate? Is it to inform? So sometimes you please judge the text. This text is to educate the readers about this. This text is to inform. This text basically is to entertain. Because some of these texts are just there to entertain us. Okay. Now, the next assignment. Hopefully you will be coming. You will take a short story that you have studied. A short story, please. I know novels are too broad, but if you want to comment on a novel, that's fine. So I'll say, take take one short story, and then you will look at the theme. So then you will describe how literary features develop the theme. Let me just write it there. Right. Member Shane, could you please announce the next class here? I haven't seen the links that you just sent for me. There's when I'm concluding here, I'll ask Member Shane to give us the just breakdown of the next class so that everyone knows. But anyway, let me write it here. Your focus there. Identify any short story, like I'll say prescribed, the ones that are prescribed for your module. Any prescribed short story and discuss how literary features develop themes. Right. So obviously, you are going to look at that short story, you read it, then you look at the themes. What are the themes in the story? Then you state how literary features, right? At least identify 4 literary features. You can't discuss everything. So I'll say here, identify at least 4 literary features. Okay, identify at least 4 literary features. So, you know, while I was saying this, I don't want you to just go and now start saying irony. You're now looking for irony. You okay? Just look for any. Thank you, students. Just do that. Our next discussion will be based on this topic I've given you. Thank you.